6 months after the Murphy's Bar incident, Chief Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell stood on the podium at the Pentagon briefing room, addressing a gathering of senior military officials from all service branches. The Inter-Service Combat Training Program had exceeded every expectation and performance metric established during its pilot phase. What had begun as a solution to a security concern had evolved into one of the military's most successful cross-training initiatives. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, her voice carrying confidently through the large room. "The data clearly demonstrates that participants in our program show an average 37% improvement in close-quarters combat effectiveness, with some individuals achieving improvements of over 60%. She clicked to the next slide, which displayed detailed statistics from the past 6 months of training cycles. More significantly, we've documented a measurable increase in inter-service cooperation and understanding. Participants report improved confidence in their ability to work effectively with personnel from other branches, and command evaluations show enhanced tactical flexibility in joint operations." Admiral Morrison, who was seated in the front row, nodded approvingly as Sarah continued her presentation. The program had become one of his signature initiatives, and its success was reflecting positively on his leadership of Naval Special Operations. The program has now trained over 200 personnel from all service branches, including international participants from allied nations. We've established permanent training facilities at 3 locations, with plans for expansion to 2 additional sites within the next fiscal year. Sarah paused to take a sip of water and scan the audience. She could see Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, now promoted to Gunnery Sergeant, sitting with other Marine representatives. Their professional relationship had evolved into a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence. Rodriguez had become the program's primary Marine liaison and had been instrumental in developing specialized curricula for different military occupational specialties. "Perhaps most importantly," Sarah continued, "we've received reports from operational units indicating that program graduates are applying their training effectively in real-world situations. Over the past 4 months, we've documented 17 instances where personnel credited their program training with mission success or personal survival in combat situations." This was the statistic that mattered most to Sarah. Academic improvements and test scores were valuable, but knowing that her instruction had literally saved lives in the field provided a level of satisfaction that no promotion or commendation could match. General Patricia Williams, the Army's representative on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, raised her hand. "Chief Mitchell, what are the program's current capacity limitations, and how are you addressing the increasing demand for training slots?" "Excellent question, ma'am. Current capacity is limited primarily by instructor availability rather than facilities or equipment. We're addressing this through a train-the-trainer program that will certify qualified personnel from each service branch to conduct program instruction at their home installations." Sarah clicked to another slide showing the proposed instructor certification curriculum. "The goal is to maintain consistent quality and standards while dramatically expanding our training capacity. We estimate that within 18 months, we'll be able to train over 1,000 personnel annually while maintaining our current effectiveness metrics." Colonel James Patterson, representing Air Force Special Operations Command, leaned forward in his chair. "Chief, there have been some informal discussions about adapting this program for law enforcement applications. Have you given any consideration to civilian applications?" This was a question Sarah had been expecting. Several federal agencies had expressed interest in the program, and there were obvious applications for police and security personnel. "Sir, we've received inquiries from multiple civilian agencies, and there's definitely potential for adaptation. However, our current focus is on maximizing military effectiveness and ensuring we can meet service demands before expanding into civilian markets." The briefing continued for another 30 minutes, with Sarah fielding questions about everything from budget requirements to international partnerships. When it concluded, she was surrounded by officials wanting to discuss specific aspects of the program or arrange visits to training facilities. Admiral Morrison approached her as the crowd began to thin. "Outstanding presentation, Chief. I've been asked to inform you that the Secretary of Defense is personally interested in the program's development. There's discussion about incorporating similar training methodologies into basic military education curricula. This was news that went beyond Sarah's wildest expectations. The possibility of influencing how all military personnel were trained represented an opportunity to make a lasting impact on military effectiveness and readiness. Sir, I'm honored by the Secretary's interest. How can I best support those discussions? Continue doing exactly what you've been doing. The results speak for themselves, and your leadership has been exemplary throughout this entire process. As the Pentagon meeting concluded and Sarah prepared to return to Norfolk, she reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this point. The incident at Murphy's Bar, which had initially seemed like such a disaster, had ultimately provided the catalyst for the most rewarding period of her career. Her phone rang as she walked through the Pentagon corridors toward the exit. The caller ID showed Rodriguez's number. "Gunny, what's the word?" she answered. "Chief, I just wanted to let you know that the next group of Marine participants includes some personnel who were specifically requesting assignment based on recommendations from previous graduates. Word is spreading that this training actually works." This was exactly the kind of organic growth that indicated genuine program success. When warriors recommended training to their peers, it carried more weight than any official endorsement. That's outstanding news. Are you still planning to attend the instructor certification course next month? Wouldn't miss it. I've got approval to establish a permanent training site at Quantico, and I need to be fully certified before we start accepting students there. The expansion to Quantico represented a major milestone for the program. Having a permanent presence at the Marine Corps' primary training installation would provide access to a much larger population of potential participants and would further legitimize the program within Marine culture. Excellent. I'll see you in Norfolk next month for the certification course. As Sarah ended the call and continued toward her car, she encountered an unexpected figure waiting near the Pentagon's main entrance. It was Jessica, the young woman she had helped at Murphy's Bar 6 months earlier. Sarah almost didn't recognize her in professional attire, but the recognition was mutual. "Excuse me, Chief Mitchell?" Jessica approached somewhat hesitantly. "I don't know if you remember me, but you helped me at a bar in Virginia Beach several months ago." Sarah was genuinely surprised to encounter Jessica in this setting. "Of course I remember you. What are you doing at the Pentagon?" "I work here now, actually. I'm a civilian analyst with the Defense Intelligence Agency. I've been following the news about your training program, and I wanted to thank you again for what you did that night." This unexpected encounter provided a perfect reminder of why the incident at Murphy's Bar had been worth all the complications it had caused. Sarah's intervention had protected an innocent person from potential harm, and that remained the most important outcome regardless of what had followed. "I'm just glad you weren't seriously hurt that night. How are you doing now?" "Much better, thank you. That experience actually motivated me to take self-defense classes, and eventually led to my interest in military affairs and my current position here. In a way, that awful night changed my life for the better." They talked for a few more minutes about Jessica's career path and her work at the Pentagon. As they prepared to part ways, Jessica had one final comment. "Chief, I hope you know that what you've accomplished with this training program is amazing. You've turned your skills into something that's helping so many people. That says a lot about your character." As Sarah drove back to Norfolk, she considered Jessica's words and their deeper meaning. Military service had always been about more than personal achievement or career advancement. It was about using individual skills and dedication to contribute to something larger and more important than oneself. The training program had evolved into exactly that kind of contribution. Every person who graduated from the program carried enhanced capabilities that could protect their fellow service members and contribute to mission success. The ripple effects would extend far beyond what could be measured or documented. When Sarah arrived back at her quarters that evening, she found a message waiting from Commander Harrison requesting a meeting the following morning. The tone suggested good news, and her speculation was confirmed when she met with him the next day. "Sarah, I have some exciting news," Harrison began without preamble. "You've been selected for the Advanced Strategic Studies program at the Naval War College. It's a year-long program that prepares senior personnel for major command responsibilities. This was one of the most prestigious educational opportunities available to naval personnel, typically reserved for officers being groomed for the highest levels of leadership. The fact that she was being considered as an enlisted person was extraordinary. "Sir, I'm honored by the selection, but what would happen to the training program during my absence?" "That's been carefully considered. Rodriguez and the other certified instructors would maintain operational continuity, and you would remain involved in strategic planning and curriculum development through distance learning and periodic visits. The program is now sufficiently established that it can function effectively with distributed leadership." The War College opportunity represented the next phase of Sarah's career development, preparing her for responsibilities that would extend far beyond her current role. It would also provide opportunities to influence military education and training at the highest policy levels. When would the program begin? Next fall. That gives you several months to complete the instructor certification program, establish the new training sites, and ensure smooth transition of day-to-day operations. As Sarah left Harrison's office that morning, she reflected on how completely her life had changed since that night at Murphy's bar. What had begun as a simple desire for a quiet drink had ultimately led to career opportunities she had never imagined possible. 3 weeks into her time at Riverside Military Academy, Sarah had settled into a routine that felt both familiar and strange. The early morning formations, the structured meals, the endless inspections, all of it echoed her real military experience while somehow feeling like an elaborate game of dress-up. The academic portion of the program was the most challenging aspect, not because the material was difficult, but because she had to pretend she was learning concepts she had mastered years ago. In military history class, Professor Bennett would lecture about famous battles while Sarah sat in the back row, remembering classified operations that would never make it into any textbook. Today we're discussing the importance of intelligence gathering in modern warfare, Professor Bennett announced to the class of 30 cadets. "Can anyone tell me why accurate information is crucial to mission success?" Several hands shot up, including Tyler's. The professor nodded in his direction. "Sir, intelligence allows commanders to make informed decisions about troop deployment and tactical approaches," Tyler recited, his answer textbook perfect and completely lacking in real understanding. Sarah bit back the urge to laugh. Tyler's clinical description bore no resemblance to the reality of intelligence work. The long hours spent analyzing grainy photographs, the life-or-death decisions based on incomplete information, the gut instinct that sometimes meant more than all the data in the world. "Excellent answer, Morrison," Professor Bennett said. "Anyone want to add to that?" Sarah found herself raising her hand before she could stop herself. "Sir, intelligence is only as good as the people gathering it, and the speed at which it can be acted upon. The best intelligence in the world is useless if it arrives too late, or if the people receiving it don't understand its limitations." The classroom fell silent. Professor Bennett looked surprised by the depth of her response, while Tyler's expression shifted to something between irritation and curiosity. "That's a very sophisticated perspective, Martinez," Professor Bennett said slowly. "Have you had personal experience with intelligence gathering?" Sarah felt the weight of 30 pairs of eyes on her. She had said too much, revealed knowledge that a civilian security worker shouldn't possess. "Just what I've read, sir," she replied, forcing her voice to remain casual. "I find the subject interesting." Tyler's eyes narrowed slightly, and Sarah knew she had made her first real mistake. He was clearly intelligent enough to recognize that her answer went beyond academic knowledge. She would need to be more careful. After class, Tyler caught up with her in the hallway. "That was pretty impressive in there," he said, falling into step beside her. "You seem to know a lot about military operations for someone with a civilian background." "I read a lot," Sarah replied, keeping her tone neutral. "Right," Tyler said, his voice carrying a hint of skepticism. "What kind of security work did you do before coming here? You mentioned that the first day." Sarah had prepared for this question, but Tyler's persistent interest was starting to concern her. Most people accepted surface answers and moved on. Tyler seemed determined to dig deeper. "Corporate security," she said. "Nothing exciting. Mostly background checks and risk assessments." It wasn't entirely untrue. She had done risk assessments, just in war zones rather than corporate boardrooms. She had conducted background checks, though they usually involved determining whether someone was a threat to national security rather than company assets. Must have been pretty high-level corporate security to give you that kind of insight into military intelligence, Tyler pressed. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Is there something specific you want to know, Morrison? The challenge in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Tyler's smile widened, but his eyes remained calculating. Just trying to get to know my fellow cadets, he said smoothly. We're all going to be working together for the next 2 years. It helps to understand everyone's background and capabilities. My capabilities are whatever the academy needs them to be, Sarah replied. Just like everyone else here. Tyler nodded slowly, but she could see he wasn't satisfied with her answer. As they parted ways to attend different classes, Sarah realized she had attracted exactly the kind of attention she had hoped to avoid. The physical training portion of the program proved to be another challenge, though for different reasons. The PT instructors pushed the cadets through exercises designed to build endurance and strength. But, for Sarah, the routines felt almost laughably easy compared to what she was accustomed to. During their 3rd week of training, Instructor Davis led the cadets through an obstacle course that had been designed to challenge their physical limits. Most of the younger cadets struggled with the rope climb and the wall traverse, their faces red with exertion as they pushed themselves to complete each challenge. Sarah completed the course in half the time of the next fastest cadet, moving through the obstacles with a fluid efficiency that came from years of specialized training. She had tried to hold back, to blend in with the group, but muscle memory and competitive instinct had taken over. Martinez, Instructor Davis called out as she crossed the finish line. Where did you learn to move like that? High school athletics, sir, Sarah replied, breathing normally despite having just completed what was supposed to be an exhausting physical challenge. Track and field, some gymnastics. Instructor Davis studied her with the kind of professional assessment that made Sarah nervous. He was retired military himself, and she could see recognition beginning to dawn in his eyes. You've got natural talent, he said carefully. Have you considered specialized military training after graduation? I'm focused on getting through the academy first, sir, Sarah replied, hoping to deflect further questions. But she could see other cadets watching her with new interest, particularly Tyler, who had struggled significantly with the wall traverse and finished near the middle of the pack. His expression suggested he was filing away this new information along with everything else he had observed about her. That evening, Sarah found herself on cleanup duty in the dining hall along with 6 other cadets, including Tyler and Jessica. The work was mindless, scrubbing tables and sweeping floors, but it provided an opportunity for casual conversation away from the formal structure of classes and formations. Sarah, you killed it on the obstacle course today, Jessica said admiringly as she wiped down tables. I could barely get over that first wall, and you made the whole thing look easy. Just got lucky, Sarah replied, focusing intently on the floor she was mopping. That wasn't luck, Tyler interjected from across the room where he was stacking chairs. That was technique. Military technique. The casual conversation stopped. David, who had been joking with another cadet, turned to listen. Rebecca paused in her sweeping. Everyone was suddenly paying attention to the undercurrent of tension that had been building between Sarah and Tyler for weeks. What are you suggesting? Sarah asked quietly, her hand tightening slightly on the mop handle. Tyler set down the chair he was holding and walked closer. I'm suggesting that you have training that goes way beyond high school athletics. The way you moved through that course, the way you carry yourself, the things you know about military operations, none of that comes from corporate security work. Maybe you should focus on your own performance instead of analyzing mine, Sarah replied, her voice remaining calm despite the adrenaline beginning to flow through her system. Oh, I've been focusing, Tyler said, his tone becoming more aggressive. I've been watching you for 3 weeks, and you don't add up. You're older than the rest of us, you clearly have advanced training, and you deflect every question about your background. So what's the real story, Martinez? What are you hiding? The dining hall had fallen completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff seemed to have stopped working to listen to the confrontation unfolding in the main room. Sarah set down her mop and turned to face Tyler completely. I'm not hiding anything. I'm here for the same reason as everyone else, to serve my country. Right. But some of us are here to learn how to serve, Tyler shot back. You already know how, don't you? The question is, why are you pretending you don't? The accusation hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sarah could feel her carefully constructed cover story beginning to crumble under Tyler's relentless questioning. Part of her wanted to tell him exactly who she was and what she had done, to see if his arrogance could survive learning that he was facing someone who had operated in the world's most dangerous places. But doing so would end everything. It would expose the truth she wasn't ready to deal with, would bring attention she couldn't handle, and would likely result in her removal from the academy. She needed this place, needed the time and space it provided to figure out who she was going to be now that her military career was over. "I don't know what you think you've figured out," she said carefully, "but you're wrong. I'm just another cadet trying to make it through this program." Tyler studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. "No, you're not. But don't worry, I'll figure out what your deal is eventually. I always do." The threat was clear, and Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. Tyler wasn't just curious or suspicious. He was actively working to expose her. That made him dangerous in a way she wasn't prepared to deal with. Jessica broke the tension by clearing her throat loudly. "Can we maybe focus on getting this cleanup finished? Some of us have studying to do tonight." The group slowly returned to their tasks, but the easy camaraderie that had existed before was gone. Sarah could feel the weight of suspicious glances and whispered conversations. Tyler's confrontation had accomplished exactly what he had probably intended. It had isolated her from the group and made her previous anonymity impossible to maintain. After cleanup duty ended, Sarah walked back to Harrison Hall alone, her mind racing through possible responses to Tyler's investigation. She could try to discredit him, could attempt to turn the other cadets against him, could even file a complaint about harassment. But all of those options carried risks she wasn't prepared to take. The real problem was that Tyler was right. She was hiding something significant, and her cover story had holes that someone with his intelligence and persistence could eventually expose. The question was whether she could maintain her deception long enough to complete what she had come here to do. In her room, Jessica was already studying at her desk, but she looked up as Sarah entered. "That got pretty intense tonight," Jessica said carefully. "Tyler can be really persistent when he thinks he's onto something. Is that supposed to be a warning?" Sarah asked, settling onto her bed. "Maybe," Jessica admitted. "Tyler's family has a lot of influence at this academy. His father is a major donor, and Tyler knows it. He's used to getting what he wants, and he doesn't like it when people don't fit into the boxes he creates for them." Sarah considered this information. Tyler wasn't just a suspicious cadet. He was a connected one, with the kind of family influence that could make her life very difficult if he decided to pursue his investigation through official channels. "What would you do if you had something in your past that you weren't ready to talk about?" Sarah asked. Jessica set down her pencil and turned to face her roommate fully. "I guess I'd hope that the people around me would respect my privacy until I was ready to share. But I'd also probably worry about what would happen if someone found out before I was ready." The honesty in Jessica's voice was refreshing after weeks of carefully managed conversations and hidden agendas. Sarah found herself wondering what it would be like to have a real friend again, someone she could trust with at least part of the truth. "What if what you were hiding wasn't bad, just complicated?" Sarah asked. "Then I'd probably try to find someone I could trust to help me figure out how to deal with it," Jessica replied. "Secrets have a way of becoming bigger problems when you try to handle them alone." That night, Sarah lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the academy after hours, distant conversations from other rooms, the periodic footsteps of night watch cadets making their rounds, the mechanical hum of the building's heating system. The sounds should have been comforting, reminiscent of her years living in military quarters around the world. Instead, they felt ominous. Tyler's confrontation had changed something fundamental about her situation at Riverside. The careful balance she had maintained for 3 weeks was gone, replaced by an active threat to her cover story and her peace of mind. She thought about Marcus and what he would have advised. He had always been good at reading people and situations, at finding creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. But Marcus was gone, and Sarah was facing this challenge alone. The smart thing would be to leave Riverside immediately, before Tyler could dig deeper or before her own behavior gave away more clues about her real background. She could disappear again, find another way to deal with her past, and plan her future. The next few weeks at Riverside Academy passed in a tense game of cat and mouse. Tyler had recruited several other cadets to help him investigate Sarah's background, turning what should have been routine conversations into subtle interrogations. Meanwhile, Sarah found herself constantly on guard, weighing every word and action to avoid revealing more than she already had. The situation reached a new level of complexity when Captain Rodriguez, the Academy's tactical operations instructor, announced a special training exercise that would test the cadets' ability to work under pressure. This weekend, you'll be participating in a Capture the Flag exercise in the woods behind the Academy, Captain Rodriguez explained to the assembled cadets. You'll be divided into 2 teams with minimal equipment and no communication devices. The objective is to locate and secure the other team's flag while protecting your own. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This type of exercise was exactly the kind of scenario where her real training might become impossible to hide. In similar situations during her SEAL training, she had learned to navigate difficult terrain in darkness, to move silently through hostile territory, and to think strategically under extreme pressure. Teams will be announced tomorrow, Captain Rodriguez continued. Remember, this exercise is designed to push you beyond your comfort zones. Some of you will discover capabilities you didn't know you had. Others will learn valuable lessons about your limitations. After the briefing, Tyler approached Sarah with his usual predatory smile. Should be interesting to see how everyone performs under real pressure, he said. I have a feeling some people might surprise us. The implication was clear. Tyler intended to use the exercise as another opportunity to gather evidence about her background. Sarah realized she was facing a difficult choice. She could either try to deliberately underperform, risking mission failure and potentially putting other cadets in danger, or she could use her skills effectively and almost certainly expose herself. That evening, Jessica found Sarah sitting by herself in the common room, staring out the window at the dark forest where the exercise would take place. You look like you're planning a military campaign, Jessica observed, settling into the chair beside her. Just thinking about the exercise, Sarah replied. These kinds of things can be pretty intense. Are you worried about it? Because honestly, I'm terrified, Jessica admitted. I've never done anything like this before. What if I panic? What if I let my team down? Sarah turned to look at her roommate, seeing genuine fear in the younger woman's eyes. Jessica had become the closest thing to a real friend Sarah had found at the academy, and the thought of her struggling alone in the woods triggered protective instincts that went far deeper than cadet loyalty. You'll do fine, Sarah said gently. The key is to stay calm and remember your training. Trust your teammates, communicate clearly, and don't try to be a hero. Easy for you to say, Jessica said with a weak laugh. You always seem so confident about everything. I bet you'll probably end up leading whatever team you're on. The comment hit closer to home than Jessica could have known. Leadership had been Sarah's role in every unit she had ever served with, from her first deployment through her final mission with Marcus's team. The instinct to take charge in dangerous situations was so deeply ingrained that suppressing it would be almost impossible. Sometimes following is just as important as leading, Sarah replied, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. The next morning, Captain Rodriguez announced the team assignments. Sarah found herself assigned to Team Alpha along with Jessica, Tyler, and 9 other cadets. Tyler's smile when he heard the assignments told her everything she needed to know. He had either requested to be on her team or had influenced the selection process to ensure he could observe her performance closely. Team Alpha's flag was positioned on a wooded hilltop approximately 2 miles from the Academy's main campus. Team Bravo would start from the opposite side of the exercise area, with both teams expected to locate and capture the enemy flag while defending their own position. As the cadets prepared their equipment, Sarah found herself automatically conducting the kind of pre-mission assessment that had become second nature during her years of active service. She studied the topographical maps, identified potential routes of approach and withdrawal, and evaluated her teammates' capabilities based on their performance in previous training exercises. Tyler was strong and athletic, but had shown poor judgment under pressure. Rebecca was cautious and methodical, good at following orders, but lacking initiative. Michael had leadership potential, but tended to overthink complex situations. Jessica was smart and determined, but had limited physical training and no experience with tactical operations. The analysis was complete before Sarah realized she was doing it, and she felt a familiar mixture of anticipation and dread. This was exactly the kind of thinking that had made her an effective special operations soldier, but it was also the kind of thinking that she was supposed to be hiding. "All right, Alpha Team, listen up," Tyler announced as the group gathered around the map table. "I'll be taking point on this operation. Our strategy should be aggressive, locate their flag quickly, and get back to defend our position." Several cadets nodded in agreement, but Sarah could see the flaws in Tyler's approach immediately. His plan relied too heavily on speed and not enough on intelligence gathering. He was treating the exercise like a race when it should be approached like a chess match. What about reconnaissance? Sarah found herself asking before she could stop herself. Shouldn't we try to gather information about their position and capabilities before committing to an approach route? Tyler's expression hardened. "This isn't a real war, Martinez. It's a training exercise. Sometimes you need to trust your instincts and move decisively. Decisive movement based on incomplete information is how you walk into ambushes," Sarah replied, her voice carrying more authority than she had intended. The group fell silent, and Sarah realized she had made another mistake. Her response had been automatic, drawn from years of experience with actual combat operations where poor reconnaissance had cost lives. But to these cadets, her knowledge seemed to come from nowhere. "Speaking from experience again?" Tyler asked, his tone sharp with suspicion. "Speaking from common sense," Sarah replied, trying to dial back her intensity. "But you're the team leader. I'll follow whatever plan you decide on." Tyler studied her for a long moment, then turned back to the map. "Right. We'll move out in 15 minutes. Stay close, watch for signals, and remember that this is about teamwork." The exercise began at dawn, with both teams moving out from their respective starting positions. Alpha Team made their way through the dense forest using the route Tyler had selected, which followed obvious paths and offered little concealment from potential observation. Sarah found herself constantly fighting the urge to suggest course corrections or point out tactical errors. When Tyler led them across an open meadow that offered perfect sight lines for enemy observation, she bit her tongue and followed along. When he failed to post security while the team took a rest break, she forced herself to remain quiet despite every instinct screaming at her to establish a proper defensive perimeter. 3 hours into the exercise, Alpha Team had made little progress toward locating the enemy flag, while their own defensive position had been left essentially unguarded. Tyler's aggressive strategy was proving to be exactly the kind of reckless approach that Sarah had expected, but correcting his mistakes would require revealing knowledge she couldn't explain. The situation reached a crisis point when the team encountered a steep ravine that blocked their planned route. Tyler stood at the edge, studying the terrain below with obvious frustration. "We'll have to go around," he announced. "It'll add at least an hour to our approach time." Sarah looked at the ravine and immediately saw 3 different ways to cross it safely using basic rope techniques. The rock face on the far side offered multiple anchor points, and there were several fallen trees that could serve as natural bridges with minimal modification. In her previous life, this obstacle would have delayed her team by maybe 20 minutes. "Maybe we should look for alternative crossing points," she suggested carefully. "There aren't any," Tyler replied with obvious irritation. "I already checked the map. This ravine runs for miles in both directions." Sarah pointed to a section about 50 meters downstream where a large tree had fallen across the gap. "What about there? It looks like that tree trunk might be stable enough to cross." Tyler followed her gaze, then looked back at her with new suspicion. "How did you spot that from here?" "The tree's partially hidden by undergrowth. Because I've been trained to identify tactical opportunities in difficult terrain," Sarah thought, but didn't say. "I guess I just have good eyes for this kind of thing." The group made their way to the fallen tree, which proved to be exactly as stable as Sarah had predicted. However, crossing it required a level of balance and confidence that most of the cadets didn't possess. Jessica froze halfway across, paralyzed by the 20-foot drop below. "I can't do this," Jessica called out, her voice tight with panic. "I'm going to fall." Tyler's response was to shout encouragement from the safety of solid ground, which only seemed to make Jessica more frightened. The rest of the team stood around helplessly, unsure how to help their teammate who was now crying and clinging to the tree trunk. Sarah watched the situation unfold for about 30 seconds before her protective instincts overrode her need for concealment. Moving with the fluid grace that came from years of specialized training, she crossed the tree trunk quickly and positioned herself just behind Jessica. "Hey, look at me," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the calm authority she had learned to project in crisis situations. "You're doing fine. The tree's solid, and you're perfectly safe. I'm right here behind you, and I'm not going to let anything happen to you." Jessica turned slightly to look at Sarah, tears streaming down her face. "I can't move. I'm too scared." "Yes, you can," Sarah replied with absolute confidence. "We're going to do this together. Don't look down, don't look at the other side. Just focus on me and take one small step at a time." Over the next 10 minutes, Sarah guided Jessica across the fallen tree with a combination of technical instruction and psychological support that was far more sophisticated than anything a civilian should have known. She positioned herself to catch Jessica if she fell, provided specific guidance about foot placement and balance, and maintained a steady stream of calming conversation that gradually reduced Jessica's panic to manageable levels. When they finally reached the other side, Jessica collapsed on solid ground with relief. "Thank you," she gasped. "I never could have done that without you." But Tyler wasn't looking at Jessica. He was staring at Sarah with an expression of dawning realization. "That was pretty impressive," he said slowly. "Most people would have been too scared to go out there themselves, let alone help someone else. Where exactly did you learn those kinds of rescue techniques?" Sarah felt her carefully constructed cover story crumbling around her. The way she had handled the crisis had been pure muscle memory, the result of countless training scenarios where team members had needed immediate assistance in dangerous situations. There was no way to explain her competence without acknowledging training that went far beyond civilian experience. "I took some outdoor leadership courses in college," she replied, knowing how weak the explanation sounded even as she said it. "Right," Tyler said, his voice heavy with sarcasm. "Outdoor leadership courses that taught you advanced rescue techniques and crisis management." "What college was this?" "The Navy SEALs Academy." The comment was meant as a joke, but Tyler's eyes remained deadly serious. He had moved beyond suspicion into active investigation mode, and Sarah realized that her time at Riverside Academy was probably coming to an end. "Let's just focus on completing the mission," she said, trying to redirect the conversation away from her background. But Tyler wasn't finished. As the team continued through the forest, he began asking increasingly pointed questions about her knowledge of tactical procedures, her physical capabilities, and her reasons for attending the academy. With each question, Sarah's options became more limited. The final confrontation came when Alpha Team finally located Team Bravo's flag position. The enemy team had established their base camp in a natural depression surrounded by thick vegetation, with clear sight lines in all directions and multiple escape routes. It was exactly the kind of defensive position that Sarah would have chosen herself. "How do we approach without being seen?" Tyler asked the group, but his eyes remained fixed on Sarah. Sarah studied the terrain for less than 30 seconds before identifying the optimal approach route, the best time to make the assault, and the most likely positions where Team Bravo would have placed their sentries. But sharing this analysis would require explaining tactical knowledge that she couldn't possibly possess. "We need more information before we can make a plan," she said carefully. "What kind of information?" Tyler pressed. "Guard positions, patrol patterns, their defensive capabilities," Sarah replied. Then realized she had revealed too much again. Tyler smiled coldly. "And how exactly would you suggest we gather that intelligence, Martinez? Should we conduct surveillance and reconnaissance like a real military unit?" The trap was perfectly laid, and Sarah knew she had walked directly into it. Tyler had been building toward this moment for weeks, accumulating evidence, and waiting for the right opportunity to force her hand. "I think we should observe them for a while before making our move," she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "Or," Tyler said, his tone becoming openly hostile, "maybe you could just tell us what a real soldier would do in this situation, since you clearly have experience with these kinds of operations." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. The rest of Alpha Team was watching the exchange with growing confusion and concern. Jessica looked particularly troubled, as if she was beginning to understand that there were deeper currents running beneath this conversation. Sarah felt herself standing at a crossroads that she had been trying to avoid for months. She could continue lying, could maintain her cover story, and hope that Tyler's suspicions never became actual proof. Or she could finally stop running from who she was and deal with the consequences. Before she could make that decision, the situation was taken out of her hands. The sound of approaching footsteps through the undergrowth caused everyone to freeze. Team Bravo had apparently discovered Alpha Team's location and was moving to engage them. In the confusion that followed, with cadets scrambling for cover and shouting instructions to each other, Sarah's military training took over completely. She moved through the forest like a ghost, using terrain and vegetation for concealment in ways that years of specialized training had made automatic. While the other cadets crashed through the underbrush or stood exposed in clearings, Sarah positioned herself to observe the entire tactical situation without being detected. From her concealed position, she could see that Team Bravo had divided into two groups, with one element moving to flank Alpha Team's position while the other maintained frontal pressure. It was a classic small unit tactic that would be devastatingly effective against inexperienced opponents. Tyler and the rest of Alpha Team were walking directly into an ambush, and they had no idea what was happening. Sarah watched her teammates moving towards certain defeat and felt Sarah move through the forest like a predator stalking prey, every step calculated to avoid detection while closing the distance between herself and Team Bravo's flanking element. The transformation from cautious cadet to tactical operator was so complete that she seemed to become one with the shadows between the trees. She reached Jessica's position just as three members of Team Bravo emerged from concealment, their faces painted with camouflage and their movements coordinated with military precision. They had been planning to capture Jessica quietly, but Sarah's intervention changed everything. "Contact left," she whispered to Jessica, using the brevity code that came automatically after years of actual combat operations. "Move to that fallen log and stay low." Jessica froze for a moment, confused by the sudden appearance of her roommate and the authoritative tone she had never heard before. But something in Sarah's voice convinced her to obey without question. Sarah positioned herself between Jessica and the approaching Team Bravo members, evaluating the tactical situation with the kind of instant analysis that had kept her alive in far more dangerous circumstances. Three opponents, moving in a loose wedge formation, equipped with training weapons, but no real defensive gear. They were treating the exercise like a game, which gave her a significant advantage. The lead member of Team Bravo was Kevin Walsh, a confident sophomore who had been bragging all week about his family's military background. He spotted Sarah and Jessica near the fallen log and raised his training weapon with a triumphant grin. "Gotcha," he called out, loud enough for his teammates to hear. Two more prisoners for. His celebration was cut short as Sarah moved with a speed and precision that seemed impossible. In one fluid motion, she rolled behind a tree, flanked wide to Kevin's right, and appeared behind him before he could react. Her hand clamped over his mouth while her other arm wrapped around his throat in a perfect sleeper hold. Kevin struggled for about 10 seconds before going limp, unconscious but unharmed. Sarah lowered him silently to the ground and appropriated his training weapon before either of his teammates realized what had happened. The second Team Bravo member, Rebecca Torres from Delta Company, turned just in time to see Sarah emerging from behind Kevin's position. Rebecca was smart and cautious, exactly the kind of opponent who would be most dangerous in this situation. "Contact rear," Rebecca shouted, bringing her weapon up to engage this unexpected threat. But Sarah was already moving again, using the natural terrain and vegetation for concealment in ways that turned the forest into her personal maze. Rebecca fired several training rounds at shadows and glimpses, but Sarah seemed to anticipate each shot and disappear before the projectiles could find their target. The third Team Bravo member, James Chun from Bravo Company, tried to flank around to cut off Sarah's escape route. It was sound tactical thinking, but he was operating against someone who understood small unit tactics at a level that made his academy training seem like kindergarten finger painting. Sarah allowed James to think he had successfully positioned himself in her path, then materialized from a direction he hadn't even considered. She had climbed 15 feet up into the canopy of a large oak tree, using branches and natural handholds to achieve a position that offered perfect overwatch of the entire engagement area. From her elevated position, Sarah could see Tyler and the rest of Alpha Team approximately 100 meters away, completely unaware that their teammates were fighting for their tactical lives. She could also see the main body of Team Bravo, still focused on their frontal assault and oblivious to the fact that their flanking element had been neutralized. The smart move would have been to extract Jessica and withdraw to rejoin Tyler's group. But Sarah was no longer thinking like someone trying to hide her capabilities. She was thinking like a special operations soldier who had identified a tactical opportunity too good to pass up. Using hand signals that Jessica somehow understood despite never having seen them before, Sarah directed her roommate to move toward a predetermined rally point while she prepared to engage the main body of Team Bravo. The plan was ambitious and probably unnecessary, but Sarah found herself unable to resist the challenge. Moving through the tree canopy with the silent grace of someone who had conducted similar operations in far more dangerous environments, Sarah positioned herself directly above Team Bravo's command element. Their leader, Marcus Thompson from Alpha Company, was studying a map and coordinating with his teammates through hand signals that would have been perfectly adequate for academy-level training. But this was no longer academy-level training. Sarah dropped from the trees directly behind Marcus, landing silently despite the 15-foot fall. Before anyone in his group could react, she had disarmed 2 cadets and positioned herself with perfect cover behind a fallen log that offered sight lines in all directions. "Freeze," she commanded, her voice carrying an authority that made trained soldiers stop in their tracks. Weapons down, hands visible. The remaining members of Team Bravo turned to face this unexpected threat, but they found themselves looking down the barrels of their own teammates' training weapons. Sarah had positioned herself perfectly, using their own formation against them while maintaining clear escape routes in case the situation deteriorated. Marcus Thompson stared at her in complete bewilderment. "Martinez, what the hell are you doing? This is supposed to be a team exercise." "It is a team exercise," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm just playing for a different team than you thought." The sound of approaching voices indicated that Tyler's group had finally realized something was happening. Sarah could hear him shouting questions and directions to his scattered teammates, trying to reassemble his unit and figure out what had gone wrong with their mission. "Sarah," Jessica's voice called out from the rally point. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Sarah called back, never taking her eyes off the 5 Team Bravo members who were now effectively her prisoners. "Just finishing up here." Tyler emerged from the undergrowth with the rest of Alpha Team, his face flushed with exertion and his weapon ready for combat. When he saw the tactical situation, Sarah standing in perfect firing position with Team Bravo's entire command element neutralized, his expression shifted from confusion to something approaching awe. "What happened here?" Tyler demanded, looking back and forth between Sarah and the subdued members of Team Bravo. Team Bravo attempted a flanking maneuver. Sarah explained in the kind of clinical tone used for after-action reports. "I intercepted their flanking element, neutralized 3 personnel, and then engaged their main body from an elevated position. Mission accomplished." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of distant whistle blasts, indicating that the exercise had been called to a halt. Captain Rodriguez's voice could be heard over a megaphone, directing all cadets to return to the assembly area for debriefing. Tyler was staring at Sarah with an expression she had never seen before. Gone was the arrogant confidence and suspicious hostility. In its place was something that looked almost like fear. "How did you do that?" he asked quietly. "No one moves like that. No one thinks like that. What are you?" Sarah looked around at the assembled cadets, her teammates, her opponents, and the friends she had been trying so hard to protect from the truth about herself. They were all staring at her with mixtures of admiration, confusion, and dawning realization. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. There was no way to explain what had just happened as the result of high school athletics or civilian security work. She had demonstrated capabilities that came from years of the most elite military training available. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "it's time for me to tell you the truth." The walk back to the assembly area was conducted in almost complete silence. Word of what had happened in the forest was already spreading through both teams, creating a buzz of speculation and amazement that followed Sarah like a wake behind a ship. Captain Rodriguez was waiting with a clipboard and the kind of professional demeanor that suggested he was prepared for routine exercise debriefing. But when he saw the expressions on the cadets' faces and heard the whispered conversations about impossible tactical maneuvers, his own expression became much more serious. "All right, people, let's start with Team Alpha," Captain Rodriguez announced. "Morrison, what was your team's experience during the exercise?" Tyler looked directly at Sarah before answering. "Sir, I think we need to have a different kind of conversation." Captain Rodriguez followed Tyler's gaze to Sarah, who was standing slightly apart from the group with the bearing of someone who had just stopped pretending to be something she wasn't. "Martinez," Captain Rodriguez said quietly, "would you mind staying after the debriefing? I think you and I need to talk." Sarah nodded, understanding that her time at Riverside Academy was probably about to end. But instead of the fear and regret she expected to feel, there was something that felt almost like relief. The constant strain of hiding who she was had been more exhausting than she realized. The formal debriefing proceeded with Tyler giving a sanitized version of the exercise that focused on teamwork and tactical lessons learned. But every few sentences, his eyes would drift back to Sarah, and she could see him struggling with questions that went far beyond military academy training. When the other cadets were dismissed to return to their dormitories, Sarah remained behind with Captain Rodriguez. The older man waited until they were alone before speaking. "That was quite a performance out there," he said, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp with professional assessment. "Care to explain how a cadet with a civilian background managed to neutralize an entire enemy unit using advanced small unit tactics?" Sarah had been dreading this conversation for months, but now that it was happening, she found herself oddly calm. "I think you already know the answer to that question, sir." Captain Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. "I've been in the military for 23 years, Martinez. I know what real training looks like when I see it. So let's skip the games and talk about what's really going on here." Sarah took a deep breath and made the decision she had been avoiding since the day she arrived at Riverside. "My name is Sarah Martinez. I'm 28 years old, and I'm a former Navy SEAL with 6 years of active service, including multiple combat deployments." The words hung in the air between them like a confession at trial. Captain Rodriguez's expression didn't change, but Sarah could see him processing the implications of what she had just revealed. "Former Navy SEAL," he repeated slowly. "And you're here because?" "Because 6 months ago, my team leader was killed during an operation that went wrong. The official investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing, but I couldn't handle staying in the service. I needed time to figure out who I was going to be if I wasn't a soldier." Captain Rodriguez nodded slowly, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. "And you thought that pretending to be a confused civilian at a military academy would help you with that process?" "My therapist thought that being around other people who wanted to serve might help me remember why I chose this path in the first place," Sarah admitted. "It seemed like a good idea at the time. And now?" Sarah looked out at the forest where she had just demonstrated capabilities that these young cadets were years away from developing. "Now I think I've been kidding myself. You can't go back to being someone you used to be. You can only figure out how to move forward as the person you've become." Captain Rodriguez was quiet for several minutes, clearly thinking through the ramifications of Sarah's revelation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of understanding that suggested he had faced similar crossroads in his own career. "The question now," he said carefully, "is what we do with this information. Your presence here has been based on false pretenses, but I can see that your intentions were genuine. The problem is that several cadets now know you're not who you claim to be, and that kind of secret has a way of spreading." Sarah had been thinking about the same problem. Tyler would certainly share what he had learned, and probably embellish it in the telling. Within hours, rumors would be spreading throughout the academy about the mysterious cadet who turned out to be a trained killer. "I should probably leave," Sarah said quietly. "I never meant for this to happen. I just wanted to help Jessica, and everything else followed from that." "Maybe," Captain Rodriguez replied. "Or maybe this is exactly what was supposed to happen. Maybe you needed to stop hiding from who you are and start figuring out how to use your experience to help other people." The suggestion caught Sarah off guard. She had been so focused on escaping her past that she hadn't considered the possibility of using it constructively. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that Riverside Academy could use someone with your background and experience. Not as a cadet, obviously, but as an instructor. Someone who can teach these young people what real military service actually involves. Sarah stared at him in amazement. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to find a new purpose, Captain Rodriguez corrected. You've been running away from your military experience, trying to become someone you're not. Maybe it's time to stop running and start building something new with the skills and knowledge you already have. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of urgent voices outside the building. Through the window, Sarah could see groups of cadets gathering in the courtyard, their animated conversations suggesting that news of the afternoon's events was spreading faster than expected. Looks like we're out of time for private discussions, Captain Rodriguez observed. Word about your performance is already getting around. We need to make a decision about how to handle this situation. Sarah looked out at the cadets who had become her friends and teammates over the past month. Jessica was among them, looking worried and confused. Tyler was there too, clearly holding court as he described what he had witnessed in the forest. What do you think they'll do when they find out the truth? Sarah asked. Some of them will be angry that you lied to them, Captain Rodriguez replied honestly. Others will be impressed by your service record. Most will probably be confused and need time to process what it means. And Tyler? Captain Rodriguez smiled grimly. Tyler Morrison has been looking for something to make himself feel important since the day he arrived here. Finding out that he's been investigating a Navy SEAL will either humble him or make him insufferable. Probably both. Sarah made her decision. If I'm going to tell them the truth, I should do it myself. They deserve to hear it from me, not through rumors and speculation. Are you sure you're ready for that conversation? The courtyard fell silent as Sarah stepped into the center of the assembled cadets. Nearly 200 young men and women had gathered, drawn by rumors and whispered conversations about what had happened during the training exercise. The setting sun cast long shadows across the stone pavement, creating an almost theatrical atmosphere for what would become one of the most important conversations of Sarah's life. Jessica stood near the front of the crowd, her expression a mixture of concern and confusion. Tyler was positioned where he could observe everyone's reactions, his face wearing the satisfied look of someone whose suspicions had finally been vindicated. The other cadets ranged from merely curious to openly skeptical, all of them waiting for an explanation that would make sense of the impossible things they had heard. Captain Rodriguez had remained in the background, allowing Sarah to handle this confrontation on her own terms. But she could feel his presence as a steadying influence, a reminder that she wasn't facing this challenge completely alone. I know there are questions about what happened today, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly across the silent courtyard. Before I answer them, I need to tell you something about myself that I should have shared from the beginning. The crowd shifted restlessly, sensing that they were about to hear something significant. Sarah could see skeptical expressions beginning to form on several faces, as if the cadets were preparing to evaluate whatever story she was about to tell them. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I'm 28 years old, she continued. For the past month, I've been living here as a cadet, just like all of you. But that's not the whole truth about who I am. Tyler stepped forward slightly, his voice cutting through the evening air. We already know you're not who you claim to be. The question is what you're hiding and why you've been lying to us. Sarah met his gaze directly, recognizing the challenge in his words, but also seeing something else, a young man who was trying to understand something that didn't fit into any of the categories he had been taught to recognize. You're right, she said simply. I haven't been completely honest about my background. The truth is that I'm a former Navy SEAL with 6 years of active military service, including multiple combat deployments in classified operations. The silence that followed was so complete that Sarah could hear individual cadets breathing. Several mouths fell open in obvious shock. Others took involuntary steps backward, as if they were suddenly looking at a dangerous animal instead of their fellow cadet. Jessica's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, hurt, confusion, and, finally, something that might have been understanding. You're really a Navy SEAL? She asked quietly. Former Navy SEAL, Sarah corrected. I left active duty 6 months ago and came here because I was trying to figure out who I could be if I wasn't a soldier anymore. Rebecca Torres from Delta Company raised her hand tentatively. So when you said you had civilian security experience, I lied, Sarah admitted. Or at least, I told you a version of the truth that was designed to hide what I really was. I've been doing security work, just not the kind that most people would recognize. Tyler's expression had shifted from satisfaction to something approaching awe, tinged with what looked like fear. Navy SEALs are. That's like the most elite military unit in existence. You've actually been in combat. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of memories she had been trying to suppress for months. Multiple deployments. Operations I can't discuss, in places I can't name, with people whose identities remain classified. Michael Chin stepped forward from the crowd. Why didn't you just tell us the truth from the beginning? That's actually incredible. Everyone here would have respected that. The question cut to the heart of what Sarah had been struggling with since arriving at Riverside. Why had she chosen deception over honesty? Why had she thought that hiding her service record would make her experience easier to process? Because, Sarah said slowly, I wasn't ready to be that person anymore. When I left the military, I left because something terrible had happened. My team leader, who was like a brother to me, was killed during an operation that went wrong. The investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing, but I couldn't handle staying in that world. The cadets were listening intently now, their initial shock giving way to something that looked like genuine interest and concern. Sarah realized she had never actually told this story to anyone, not even her therapist, in such complete detail. I came here thinking that if I could pretend to be someone normal, someone who was just starting their military journey, maybe I could figure out how to have a life that wasn't defined by combat and loss and classified operations. I wanted to remember what it felt like to serve for idealistic reasons instead of just because it was the only thing I knew how to do. Jessica wiped tears from her eyes. That's why you were always so helpful during training. You weren't learning how to be a leader, you already were one. And that's why you knew exactly what to do during the obstacle course. And in the forest today, Tyler added, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. You weren't guessing or improvising. You were using skills you've had for years. Sarah nodded. Everything I did today was muscle memory from years of real-world operations. When I saw Team Bravo setting up that flanking maneuver, when I watched Jessica walking into danger, my training took over. I couldn't stand there and watch my friends get hurt when I had the skills to prevent it. David Martinez, the class comedian who had spent weeks trying to make Sarah laugh, spoke up from the back of the crowd. So you're like a real warrior. You've done things that we've only read about in books or seen in movies. I've done things I hope none of you ever have to do, Sarah replied honestly. Combat isn't heroic or exciting when you're actually experiencing it. It's terrifying and exhausting, and it changes you in ways that you don't fully understand until years later. Amanda Foster, the girl who had been homesick since her arrival, asked the question that several others were clearly thinking. Are you dangerous? Should we be afraid of you? Sarah considered the question carefully. I have skills that most people don't have, and I've been trained to handle situations that most people will never encounter. But the reason I was selected for special operations wasn't just because I could handle dangerous missions. It was because I could be trusted to use those skills responsibly, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Like you protected Jessica today, someone called out from the crowd. Like I protected all of you today, Sarah corrected. Tyler's tactical plan was walking Alpha Team directly into an ambush. Team Bravo had positioned themselves perfectly to capture or injure several people. I intervened because I couldn't watch my teammates get hurt when I had the ability to prevent it. Tyler's face flushed red, but, to his credit, he didn't try to defend his leadership during the exercise. So what happens now, he asked. You're obviously not really a cadet. Are you going to disappear? Are you going to pretend this conversation never happened? Captain Rodriguez chose that moment to step forward from his position at the edge of the courtyard. Actually, that's something Ms. Martinez and I have been discussing. With the Academy's approval, I'd like to offer her a position as a tactical operations instructor. The suggestion caused another wave of surprised murmurs throughout the assembled cadets. Sarah could see them processing this new information, trying to understand what it would mean to have a former Navy SEAL as one of their teachers. You mean she would stay here? Jessica asked hopefully. She would stay here in a different capacity, Captain Rodriguez explained. Instead of pretending to learn things she already knows, she would help teach the skills and knowledge that all of you are actually trying to acquire. Sarah looked around at the faces of the young men and women who had been her classmates and friends for the past month. Some still looked shocked by her revelations. Others appeared excited by the possibility of learning from someone with real combat experience. A few seemed hurt that she had deceived them, though she could see understanding beginning to replace their initial anger. "What do you think?" Sarah asked the group. "Would you be comfortable having me as an instructor instead of a fellow cadet?" Tyler was the first to answer, and his response surprised everyone, including himself. "I think," he said slowly, "that I've been looking for someone who could teach me what real leadership looks like. Maybe having someone with your experience could help all of us understand what we're actually preparing for." Jessica nodded enthusiastically. "I'd love to learn from someone who's actually done the things we're studying. And honestly, Sarah, you've been helping all of us anyway. This would just make it official." Rebecca Torres raised her hand. "Can I ask you something about the combat missions? I mean, what's it really like when you're in a situation where people are actually trying to kill you?" Sarah smiled, recognizing the mixture of curiosity and nervousness in Rebecca's question. "That's exactly the kind of question I could help answer if I become an instructor here. The reality of military service is very different from what most people imagine, and I think it's important for future officers to understand both the challenges and the rewards." Over the next hour, the impromptu gathering in the courtyard evolved into something resembling a question-and-answer session. Cadets asked about everything from the physical demands of special operations training to the psychological challenges of combat deployment. Sarah answered as honestly as she could, sharing experiences that she had never discussed with anyone outside of her former unit. She told them about the moment during her first deployment when she realized that the theoretical knowledge from her training was nothing compared to the complex reality of actual operations. She described the bonds that formed between team members who depended on each other for their lives, bonds that were stronger than any friendship most people would ever experience. She also talked as Sarah thought about Jessica's friendship, about the other cadets who had trusted her, about the months she had spent trying to become someone she could never be. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, "but I think it's time anyway." As they walked toward the courtyard where the cadets were waiting, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose. For the first time since Marcus's death, she wasn't running away from something. She was moving towards something new, something that might allow her to use her experience to help other people find their own paths to service. The conversation ahead would be difficult, probably painful, and would change everything about her relationship with these young people she had come to care about. But it would also be honest, which was something she hadn't been able to say about anything in her life for far too long. Sarah Martinez, former Navy SEAL, stepped into the courtyard to face the consequences of her choices and to discover what kind of future might be possible when you stopped hiding from who you really were. The weight of impossible choices. She could maintain her cover and allow the exercise to play out naturally, watching her friends get embarrassed, but probably learning valuable lessons in the process. Or she could intervene, use her real training to turn the tactical situation around, and almost certainly expose herself completely. The decision was made for her when she saw Jessica break from cover at exactly the wrong moment, moving directly into the path of Team Bravo's flanking element. In about 30 seconds, Jessica would be captured, probably roughed up in the process, and definitely humiliated in front of the entire group. Sarah had spent 6 months trying to escape her past, trying to become someone normal and peaceful. But as she watched her friend walking into danger, she realized that some things were more important than maintaining her cover. Moving with the silent efficiency that had made her one of the Navy's most effective special operations soldiers, Sarah began her transition from hiding in the shadows to taking control of the tactical situation. The game was about to change completely, and Tyler Morrison was about to discover that his weeks of investigation had led him to uncover something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. But running would mean abandoning the first stable situation she had found since leaving the military. It would mean giving up the chance to figure out who she could become now that her old life was over. And it would mean letting Tyler win, allowing his arrogance and persistence to drive her away from something she needed. Sarah had never been good at backing down from a fight, even when strategic withdrawal would have been the smarter choice. It was a character trait that had served her well in special operations, where determination and refusal to quit often meant the difference between mission success and failure. But in this environment, with these stakes, her combative instincts might prove to be a liability rather than an asset. Tyler wasn't an enemy soldier she could outmaneuver or outfight. He was a privileged young man with connections and resources, operating in an environment where his family's influence gave him significant advantages. Still, as Sarah finally drifted off to sleep, her last conscious thought was a resolution she had made in countless dangerous situations throughout her career. She would not be driven away by intimidation or threats. Whatever game Tyler thought he was playing, she would find a way to win it. More importantly, it had demonstrated that even the most challenging situations could lead to positive outcomes if approached with the right combination of skill, professionalism, and integrity. The confrontation with Rodriguez had taught both of them valuable lessons about assumptions, respect, and the importance of seeing beyond surface appearances. The training program that had emerged from that incident was now touching hundreds of lives and enhancing military readiness in measurable ways. It represented the best kind of leadership, using personal expertise and experience to empower others and contribute to shared goals. As Sarah began planning for the final phases of the program's expansion and her own transition to the War College, she carried with her a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. The journey from that chaotic night in a dive bar to a Pentagon briefing room had been unexpected and sometimes challenging, but it had ultimately led to exactly where she was meant to be. The future held new challenges and opportunities, but Sarah approached them with confidence gained through experience and the knowledge that even the most difficult situations could be transformed into something positive through determination, skill, and the willingness to see beyond immediate obstacles to longer-term possibilities. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had been wrong about many things that night at Murphy's bar, but he had been absolutely right about one thing. Sarah Mitchell was indeed someone you didn't want to underestimate. The difference was that her strength came not just from physical capability, but from the character and intelligence to use that capability in service of something greater than herself.